Already have a Zoom, so a lot of tools. Yeah, I'll forget one right.
All right, guys, it's 11:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so Lisa Johnson is out sick. The plague was going around during SAAs, and she caught it. So I am the temp moderator for the day. Everyone can hear me online. We're good, so all that's going. Jimmy, you wanted to introduce, so go ahead.
Thank you all for coming, and really appreciate. Thank you for your support, and it is my honor to introduce Dr. Ming Zhou, and she is inspiring because whatever she does well. In terms of teaching, she is a distinguished professor of sociology and Asian American studies at the UCLA. In terms of scholarship, she published or edited or co-authored for about 20 books. And her topics include migration and development, race and ethnicity, Chinese diaspora and Asian American studies, as well as urban sociology. So she is a member of the American Academy of Arts and a scientist. So in terms of a service, Dr. Zhou is remarkable, in high demand. She is invited to Singapore to serve as a director of Chinese Heritage Center at Nanyang Technological University, a very well-known university. And she has been the director of Asian Pacific Center at the UCLA for 7 years. He has raised $1 million for these two institutions. So it is not surprising that she received a career award in addition to a book award. So at last but not least, she is a world traveler who loves bird watching and hiking. And she and her husband raised a wonderful child who is a professor, who is now a professor at the UC San Diego. So let's welcome Dr. Ming.
Thank you very much, Professor Mark. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. I'm getting excited. And Las Vegas actually is my considered second home. So in a few years down the road when I retire, I will retire here. And because I love nature, I love the outdoor. I don't mind the hot weather. I was telling Jimin that I once, by mistake, I hiked into fire. Without knowing, we are at 117 degrees. And no wonder we almost died and dehydrated. And then people said that, don't ever get into this train in the summertime. And we learned the lesson. But we love the outdoor around here. And, so this is my first time at the university, and thank you so much for coming. And so I would like to share with you some of my thoughts related to the issue of Asian American model minority stereotype. So if you have any questions, you can interrupt me anytime. Otherwise, I will just run through in 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So today I would like to go very quickly to give an overview of the current state of Asian America, and then talk more about myth making, how the model minority is stereotype is framed, and then talk about the impacts of this new stereotype, or not so new, but the stereotype would generate new stereotype and how that affects Asian Americans in particular. And then also, it would be relevant to other minority groups who are framed as the model minority. For example, Afro-Caribbean Americans, they are framed as the model minority. And then, and then also there are some Latino subgroups. If they are successful, they are called the model minority. But then being successful or termed as successful, it's also kind of socially constructed. I believe that there are forces behind that. So when I go through the experience of Asian Americans, and then that would find relevance to other minority groups. Okay, so first, the current state of, the current state of Asian America. So if we are taking a historical look in Asian America, so Asians are among one of the earliest group of immigrants into the United States. They came in large numbers in the mid-19th century, and that group was Chinese. So the Chinese were the first group among Asians to arrive in the US. Initially, they came from rural areas of South China in the Canton region, where I was from. Professor was from Shanghai, right? Mm-hmm. So you are from a bit north. So anybody is north of Canton is called northern, even though they are geographically in the south, like Shanghai. And then this group, they were needed for their labor. So they first worked in the mines, like gold mines along with the gold rush. And then later they worked in the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad. The Chinese laborers left a mark there, but then very little is known about their contribution to the railroad. And then after the railroad was completed and the mine was depleted, the Chinese were kind of pushed into the urban areas in the cities. And then they became target of exclusion in the 1870s, when our country is experiencing economic downturn and recession. So they were made scapegoat. And then at that time, Chinese comprised less than 1% of the nation's immigrant population, but Congress passed a law to exclude immigrants based on national origin of that single group. And then in 1890, from 1890 to 1917, when the Chinese were excluded, the Japanese were brought in. Now, it's not that they were brought in through free migration, but rather they were brought in because Japan was a stronger nation. So they reached an agreement with the United States to allow for immigration of the Japanese from Japan. However, the Japanese government would have to limit the number of Japanese who came. And then at the turn of last century, the Japanese government also reached a gentleman's agreement with the United States to allow for the women to come join their male laborers who came first, whereas no such law, the Chinese women were excluded along with their male counterparts. So that's why the Chinese immigrants arrived in this country a whole generation earlier than the Japanese. However, today, the Chinese community is still primarily the first generation community. 2/3 of the population are foreign born, whereas Japanese is already well into the fourth generation, in which 70% of the population are US born. So that, that has to do with the legal exclusion and then the selection of immigrants to the country. And I don't have time to really go into detail. I just want to run it by very fast. And then the third largest group would be the Filipinos. And then after the 1920s, Congress passed the Immigration Act, which is the National Origins Quota System. That act is restrictive immigration act, but actually it wasn't targeted Asians, because all the Asian exclusion legislature was already in place. Rather, it targeted the immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe when they arrived in large numbers, and the country felt that we did not have the capacity to assimilate them, so we need to put them away. So the national origins quota system was specifically in place to put a limit, to put restriction on US immigration. And at that time, the economy still needs labor, right? Where do we bring in labor? The Philippines would be an ideal place to bring in labor, because the Philippines at that time was the US, right? Was a US colony. So they are not subject to the immigration restriction. So in the mid-1920s, the Philippines stopped to come in large numbers. So before 1965, 1965 is a kind of a benchmark in US immigration, in that there was a significant immigration reform that abolished the national origins quota system established in the 1924 National Origins Act. So at that time, in 1965, before the immigration law reform, the Asian American community was primarily Japanese, Chinese, and Filipinos, in which Japanese are the largest group. And then after 1965, the Asian community grew exponentially because primarily of immigration. So immigration actually totally transformed Asian American. So the Asian American community is the fastest growing racial minority group. And in 1960, before the immigration reform, Asian Americans comprise less than 1% of the total US population. It's, the whole community is less than 1 million. But by 2020, counted in the US Census, which is a severe undercount, as you know, it grew into 7% of the total US population, with 24 million population. That includes a big.
Just pause for a second.
Just pause for 1 second.
Barbara Sanders, please mute your mic. Thank you. Continue.
Thank you. Sorry
I don't know what
about that.
happened.
You're fine.
Microphone on, so please, sorry for the interruption.
Okay, so it grew by number, both by absolute number and also relative number in terms of percentage. And Asian Americans used to be the 3 major groups, right? And then we also have less than 10,000 Filipinos and Koreans at that time, but the communities were quite tiny. But then after 1960s, 1965, so the population grew, not only in terms of the old immigrant group, but newer immigrants are coming in, and I'll cover it shortly. And right now, more than 60% of the Asian American population are foreign born. But if you compare to Mexican American population, it's about 40% that are foreign born. And Mexican American population is a large component of the population, but absolute number, they are a lot larger. And then about 25% are second generation. Second generation meaning children of immigrants. So if you have at least one parent who are foreign born, a member of the second generation. And then less than 15% are third generation or third class generation. So if you are white, then you are likely to be the great-grandchildren of European immigrants. You are likely to be fourth, fifth generation or more. But if you are Asian, if you are Asian, you're most likely to be the second generation. Third generation, only Japanese and Chinese have a significant proportion. The Chinese, only 10% are third and third class generation. Japanese, is about 20%, but still quite proportionally is quite small. So the transformation is seen in several aspects. One is national origin. So there is a diversity in national origin. And secondly, diverse socioeconomic background. And for sociologists, we measure socioeconomic status in terms of the average level of education of the group and occupational status and income. And then also diverse settlement patterns, as well as diverse modes of economic incorporation. So in terms of group diversity, we have the big six. That is all the groups that have a population over 1 million. And then we have the Chinese Indians. The Indians are growing very fast. They are part of the post-1965 group. Even though pre-1965, there is a smaller group, like less than 10,000. They are concentrated in agriculture. And then they hail from the Punjab region of northern India. But today they are a very diverse group and with relatively very high level of education. And then next is Filipinos and then Vietnamese. The Vietnamese was a refugee group that came mainly because of the Vietnam War. And then Koreans and Japanese. And Japanese dropped to the smallest of the six. And then we also have 16 other national origin groups that has at least 250,000. And then they also have tremendous within group diversity. And then if you're looking at the level of education, the US population, about 28% of the adult population have a 4-year college education compared to nearly half of the Asians. Here comes the model minority thing. And then if you're looking at the Indians, right, 70%. And most of the Indians are still first generation. And then you can see the impact of immigration selectivity. And then in terms of income, you can also see that Asian Americans has relatively higher household income compared to the US born population, as well as compare on average of the non-Hispanic population. And then they also have very diverse settlement patterns. Originally, the settlement pattern is you converge initially in the ethnic enclave, and then as you move up the socioeconomic ladder, you become dispersed and residentially assimilated, meaning you are assimilated into communities dominated by the white middle class. But now the pattern is very diverse. There are still some who converge in the ethnic enclave. The ethnic enclave has played a role traditional role in helping them. But then there are also some very obvious pattern that they, on the day of arrival, they already buy into the middle class or upper middle class suburb of big cities. And then there is, both forced segregation and voluntary segregation. Both pattern is happening. And part of it is also because of the relatively higher socioeconomic status of the newer immigrants. So not just the migration dynamic, but also social change in the whole society, social change in American society after the civil rights movement. And then most of incorporation, there are also very diverse paths. In the past, there is the conventional pattern that you move, you work yourself up. And then there are also among Asian Americans in particular, other immigrant groups also, they take entrepreneurship, ethnic entrepreneurship as an alternative path to social mobility. As well as some of the pattern, you see the immigrants that they move directly. They bypass the ethnic enclave. They move directly into the middle class professional occupation of the labor market. One is through skill migration, so that's the policy impact. The other through educational attainment. So education is a big thing because it paves a predictable path to social mobility for all Americans. So Asian Americans, they kind of take that and put a lot of pressure on their children to do well in school and move on to the primary labor market. So I did it very fast to run through the current state of Asian America. If I teach the contemporary Asian American community, I need at least 3 weeks of classes to cover that. So now let's move to the myth-making part of it, framing the model minority. Now, the Asians in America have suffered from racial stereotype, racial discrimination, and legal exclusion, right? And in the past, they were considered kind of subhuman. They are considered, there are a lot of negative image of them, both in terms of their physical look and in terms of their mental capability. Whereas today, some of those images have changed because of immigration. But one major change of it is in 1966. Now remember the timing of that year. So in 1966, in the beginning and at the end, there are two mainstream articles. One is Success Story Japanese American Style in January, and the other is US News and World Report Success Story of One Minority Group, that's the Chinese. So that year, the mainstream media had completed the framing of Asian Americans as the model minority. Okay, so, and then later on, in the 1980s, there is another surge of the media article to reinforce the model minority stereotype as more and more Asians are entering the country of, very diverse socioeconomic status. So what happened to the mid-1960s? Right? Yeah, the height of the civil rights movement, and there are a lot of legislative change, and Congress passed, a series of civil rights acts to, change, to change the larger context of the U.S. society. And at that point, the model minority was framed kind of to legitimate kind of to say that, look, the US society now has corrected its past wrong and it's moving forward, no problem. So if you are running into any problem, it's your problem, not the system's problem, right? So now what we will see why the Asian Americans are picked as the model minority. So a lot of people would say, well, Asian Americans, they are a model minority because they are successful. Look at the hot numbers, right? So in terms of their level of education, professional occupation, and household income, they are higher than other minorities, substantially higher on average, and then also higher than average Americans. And then also, if you're looking at non-Hispanic white, right, they are also doing much better than non-Hispanic white, the dominant group. So some people say, oh, we Asians, we are whiter than white, we are the white. But it's just so. And then also when you are looking at the college enrollment and academic achievement, you will see that pattern. The Asian Americans are 6 or 7% of the US population, but they are over 20% of the undergraduate student body of the Ivy's, good university. And in the state of California, we are 13% of the state's population, but in the state's prestigious campuses, the Asian Americans are overrepresented. So they are doing very well. And then if you're looking at the selective high schools, say in New York, there are a couple of high schools that are very selective. It requires standardized tests to get in. And then Asians seem to play well on that. So they seem to do very well. So a lot of people say, this is the fact that they are successful. So we would argue, like if you are talking to the Asian American crowd, we would try to dispel that myth. On the one hand, they seem to display a lot of successful indicators in terms of measured by socioeconomic status. But then what's wrong with the hot data? Right? So if you're looking at it, you have to ask, why Asian Americans are picked as the model minority and not other also highly performing groups. Now, what is problematic is we see that when the media is trying to frame the model minority, they tend to highlight some of the data points about Asian Americans that are pitting Asian Americans against other minority groups, especially African Americans. So they would heighten some of the characteristics that points to culture, right? So culture, like group-specific culture, rather than the societal system. So it's valued to say that Asian Americans are lauded as valuing marriage, parenthood, hard work, and career success. And then they attribute their success to their right values, attitudes, and behavior. So nothing about the wrong of the system, right? So in a way, the myth, we argue, that it lies in the superiority of an essentialized Asian culture. When in the past, like just 50 years earlier, the Asian culture was considered inferior and kind of a sick culture, right? And now all of a sudden it becomes superior. So what is behind the framing? So we have thought about that, the timing of it. And then why the Chinese and Japanese are singled out and not other groups? They did not single out Filipino Americans. They did not single out Indian Americans. They only single out Chinese and Japanese Americans because they suffer severe legal and social discrimination. Chinese has a law to exclude them, not just exclude them from entering the country, but societal exclusion. And it's by law they are excluded. And then Japanese is during World War II, the internment, right? Japanese American internment, when a lot of 2/3 of them are US citizens, they got interned because their ancestral nation is the enemy nation of the United States. So here, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, when American economy is in a recession, so Chinese were scapegoat for, again, the usual things, for taking jobs away from American workers, for depressing wages, and also for their bad culture, the fear of them un-Americanized Americans. And then Japanese American internment in 1942, like within a week, the Japanese would call to report to camp. And then within that weeks, they lost everything, right? And then they were pushed to camp. So after that, the two groups rise up. So it must be something superior about the culture, right? Not the system, not, they are Americans, they make it, why not you? So just now I try to argue that the hot data, when it is, written up in the main analyzed in the mainstream media, it highlights the culture kind of data point. So here are some of the quotes in the original piece. The Asian Americans allowed it as winning wealth and respect in the promised land, mainly through self-sufficiency, their own almost totally unaided effort, and no help from anyone else. And you can see that these words is pointing to other minorities. And then for their life values and attitude, hard work, family solidarity, discipline, respect, delayed gratification, non-confrontation, and not a welfare check, right? So it kind of invokes a cultural explanation of success. It becomes tautological kind of explanation, like you're successful because of your culture. So there is, the myth-making, there is something behind model minority. So Asian Americans were used as points to one, downplay the significance of racial discrimination as an explanation for the underprivileged status of other minorities. And then it also very significantly justify the system of meritocracy, right? Saying that the system of meritocracy as of now is devoid of racism. Those are things in the past, and you have to move on and do that. And also, it legitimized African Americans' collective struggle for equality, and to blame the victim. So if it's not culture, what explains Asian American success? Right? So if it's not culture, we argue that there is no such a thing as Asian culture or Asian American culture, because culture, but there are cultural effects. Culture emerges from structural circumstances. One of the structural circumstances is immigration selectivity that has to do with immigration legislation. Right? So we use a concept of hyperselectivity as opposed to hyposelectivity and then just high selectivity. So the measure that we use in my book with Jennifer Lee on the Asian American Achievement Paradox, we look at the cultural effect, but we don't consider culture as essentialized in the group, but rather how culture intersects with structural circumstances. For example, if you're looking at the selectivity, hyperselectivity, the Chinese and Indians are typical of hyperselective group. That means the immigrant groups who are here, they have the percent college graduates that is higher than the sending country and higher than the receiving country. Now, there are sociological consequences of hyperselectivity. And then hyposelectivity means that the immigrant group that are here, they have a lower percent of college graduates compared to the homeland and lower than the receiving country. So Mexicans is a typical hyposelective group. So that is a structural characteristic that have implications on how well the group is doing. Because if you are in a hyper-selected group, like the Chinese and Indians, on arrival, you are already successful, right? So you have a favorable starting point. And then also, very important, that because the group is successful, it exerts a new stereotype of what we call stereotype promise. That is, if the group is treated and considered positively, then it would lead to positive outcome. And that's a social effect. And there are we draw on the stereotype threat theory developed by Professor Costil, stereotype threat and on African Americans. That if the stereotype is invoked, then the educational outcome performance of African Americans would be lower because they feel the pressure of performing, and that pressure actually depresses the ability to perform well. So that's the stereotype threat. And in contrast, if a group is viewed positively, then even though you may be average, then you could, the outcome of it on average, you are doing better. So in our study, we find a lot of cases in which some of the children of immigrants, when they enter school, they do not speak English well, and they will see students, and the teacher put them into advanced, like AP track, right? So that they could be with other highly competitive children. And then the Asian Americans, they also have a lot of ethnic community resources to support after school. So that way, they move on and become high performing. Whereas some of their Latino friends attending the same school, when they enter the school with more advantage in terms of grades, but at the end of the school, their grade drops down because of the stereotype threat. So we see quite a lot of examples on that. So just now I already touched on some of those. Is that the hyper-selected immigrant group, like immigrant selectivity, has several expected effects. One is the favorable starting point, that is class reproduction. So class reproduction is like middle class reproduce middle class. Sometimes I talk to some of my the Chinese school parents in the middle class community. I said, don't put too much pressure on your children. It's very hard for them who drop out of high school. And they won't believe me. I said, well, the children have their own self-esteem. All their friends are graduating from high school, going to college. They would do the same, even without your pressure, right? But then if you are in the inner city, the dynamic would change. So that's class reproduction. And then the other one is a cultural frame of success. And that frame is very narrow among Asian Americans. Okay? You have to be successful in math, science, engineering, and law, or medicine. So that's that. You can't do humanities, anthropology, or sociology. Some of my Asian American, some of my Asian American studies students said, Professor Zhou, I'm shifting to Asian American major. I said, did you talk to your mom? You are my mom. And then in our study, we even hear some of the reflection of the children saying that, oh, when I shift majors from a pre-med biology to Asian American studies or to English, then my uncle said, you are destroying your parents' dream. So it's very sad on that. But then that is a cultural frame that could cut both ways, right? On the one hand, if you're going to medical school, now dental school, you see a disproportionate number of Asian Americans there because that's what their parents expect them to do. Some conform, but others not. Like in sociology, we have a few students who got their law degree, have a good practice, but then they came back to sociology to get their PhD and trying to to be an educator. And then also there are family resources to support that cultural frame, because you can think about half of the Asian American families have parents who have a college degree. So you could see the kind of middle class resources also available in the family. And then there are also unexpected effects that we say is very critical for success. So one is the ethnic capital. So if you are in a hyper-selective group, then the ethnic community would have more resources. One is human capital resources, right? If you hang out within the ethnic community, at least half of the population have a middle class, right? Have a college degree. So you have a lot of those resources. And then there are also, through entrepreneurship, there are ethnic institutions to promote the cultural frame, to promote education, to support that culture frame. Like, so your parents expect you to get a medical degree. And then there are a lot of ethnic institutions that help tutoring you to get into that academic track. So things like that. In the hyper-selective community, you have the access to that kind of resources. Whereas those resources even exist, say, in Chinatown or Koreatown, in which the relatively lower socioeconomic status co-ethnic live there. And then they live there side by side with, like in LA, with Latinos. But the children of working class background, Koreans and Chinese, they have access to their ethnic resources, whereas Mexicans, Central American children, even they live in the same community, they don't have the access to that ethnic resources available in their neighborhood, right? So there is this ethnic exclusion and inclusion dynamics that is going on. And the other one is the symbolic capital. That is what I call the stereotype promise. Like if the group is labeled as the model minority, then they tend to be positively perceived, and the outcome tend to be desirable and positive. But then again, model minority cuts both ways, and I will talk about the effect of it. So very quickly, because I only have a few minutes, I want to entertain questions. So one is I would argue that the model minority, the effect on Asian Americans is that model minority is to serve as a new mechanism of exclusion. A new mechanism of exclusion, that they are excluded as the other, not we. So when I teach the class, my first job was teaching in Louisiana, LSU. At that time, in the early 1990s, when there was only black and white, right? Very few Asian. So one of my students, who is African American, he asked me, he said, Professor Zhou, would you rather be a model minority to whom everybody is looking up, or a downtrodden minority like me, whom everybody is looking down? I have never, asked that question, so I have to ponder. But I do know that I don't want to be set up as the model. Ever since I was a child, I hate to be set up as a model, because setting me up as a model, that means you're excluding me into the collective, right? You're being held up. It's just that as being looked down upon. So it's neither. Why? It's a mechanism of othering, right? So we are kept outside the American nation and set apart as they rather than we. So we are not only set apart from other minorities, right? Because we are pit against other minorities, but also from the mainstream group. And then the other one is just the unequal treatment, right? You're being held up. You're held at different standards. So the second one is the model minority stereotype would give rise to new stereotype while reinforcing the old one. The old one meaning you are the foreigner, the other, right? So the tiger mom stereotype, right? So if you are doing well, it's because you have a tiger mom. So it's kind of suggesting that Asian Americans are not only high achievers, but their high achieving is due to the overbearing parents. So they don't have their own agents. They are being pushed. And then the nerdy image, right? They are in science, engineering, right? And medicine. So they are good at math, science, and engineering, and lacking leadership quality. So the two are connected. So you can see the effect. There is no problem on labor market entry because you tend to over-educate yourself. But there is a big problem when you try to move up the rank in the labor market. So those are the new stereotypes, some of the new stereotypes and the old stereotypes. They will carry on the thread, right? And the third one is to blur the reality as if Asian Americans no longer face racial discrimination. And we know that's not true. We still face systemic racism and racial discrimination in society. From Vincent Chin, the case in the 1980s, early 1980s, when the US and Japan were economic competitors. So Vincent was having a bachelor's party just a few days before his wedding at a bar, and then he got beaten up out of simple dispute by two disgruntled auto workers, and he was beaten up to death. And because he's Chinese and he was mistaken as Japanese, the ones that take my jobs away. And then all the way fast forward to today, during the pandemic, Asian Americans, Chinese Americans were discriminated against both overtly and covertly. Even myself, I personally have that. And some people say, oh, don't worry about it. You just run into crazy people. But the society kind of emboldened the crazy behavior, right? So we actually personally, I have experienced that people yell at me saying that, get off my way, 6 feet, when I was walking, walking on my neighborhood on the street. And then some people actually get bitten. And even our children are starting to concern, said, Mom, a lot of elderly women and elderly Asian men, elderly, were attacked. So when you are walking the street, you have to be careful. I'm a walker, so I walk a lot. You have to be careful. A good thing that the children are concerned about their parents. But then it also suggests that even among the Asian American children, they are aware about the actual impact on their community. And then there are covert anti-Asian racism too, one of which is the bamboo ceiling. We all know about the effect of glass ceiling, that is, it affects women and minorities in general in the corporate world to make it very difficult for you to move up. And then glass ceiling is, you can see what's up there very clearly, right? But it's very hard to break the glass ceiling. But still, a glass ceiling, you are inspired. So you are inspired to work hard trying to break it. But a bamboo ceiling, you cannot even see very clearly what's up there, what's possible. So your aspiration gets stifled at earlier stage, right? So you're not even aspire to move up. So the bamboo ceiling effect is particular to Asian Americans, especially Asian American men in the corporate world. And that requires another class to do. So in conclusion, we have covered very fast the current state of Asian America, and then Asian America has been transformed by immigration. And then we also talk about culture matters, like group cultural ethnicity matters, but not in the mythical way that is intrinsically Asian. There is no such a thing as intrinsic Asian, because Asians internally, they are so diverse, right? And then also the model minority is a stereotype. As a stereotype, the effect is, the long-term effect is negative. So it serves as a symbolic capital for Asian Americans, like for certain time, perhaps for your school, but then once you get out of school into the real world, you face the negative impact, especially face the barrier of the bamboo ceiling. Okay.
Questions? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. I'd like to ask you about one of the last points that you made, and particularly this terminology of the bamboo ceiling. First of all, thank you for explaining that in more detail. Usually when I encounter that phrase, it's just like they chose the word bamboo because they're talking about Asians. So it was good to know that there's actually some substance to that metaphor. What I wanted to ask you about was, you're saying that not being able to see what's possible. And so aspirations are stopping at a lower point, right? Not developing. Thinking about how in general, Asian Americans have, less social distance from whites than Blacks and other minorities. I'm just wondering, like, what's stopping them? What social closure mechanisms are they encountering that's keeping them from being able to have that, to access those networks or whatever it's needed to aspire to more?
That is a very good question, right? So what keeps them, less aspire? Is it culture or is it structure? I would say structural first, right? And then there are cultural effects too. Whenever it comes to stereotyping, that is a cultural effect. But the culture effect, the culture element, it has structural roots. Okay, now, so in terms of structure, we talk about immigration selectivity, right? So when you see a group that is, because our law, the immigration law, favors highly skilled workers. Highly skilled workers in the IT, in the pharmaceutical industry, in the kind of the rising industries rather than manufacturing, right?
Mhm.
So when the group comes, they already have the stereotype that they are good engineers, good workers, but very few people actually are able to climb up to the leadership position. So that way, it creates kind of an implicit barrier to the next generation. And one group that is managed to break this up among Asians are South Asians.
Okay.
South Asians are doing well, not because they are culturally more aggressive or whatnot, but because internally they have very strong ethnic network of training, of trying to move people ahead, training them. Whereas other groups, they don't have that coercive mechanism. Their coercive resources are trying to get you into the labor market. But once you are in, you are on your own, like that. So that is a very important kind of structural and culture effect intersecting.
Thank you. Okay, so I got two online questions. The first one is from Rachel De Vera. She asks, what are ways higher ed practitioners can fight and demystify the model minority myth in their everyday worker lives?
Okay, what should we do?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I tell my students that you should stand up to who you are and not let the stereotype, not accept the stereotype. And then, but education is one of the things, like classes like that, we need more to have greater knowledge and sensitivity about different ethnic groups and their history, their backgrounds and stuff. But then individually, sometimes it's unfair to have that solution on the individual, but we just have to stand up for our right. And also, that is another hard thing to do, not to go with the stereotype. Do whatever your heart desires. That is so un-Asian. But I would suggest that as more and more people are getting into other non-Asian field, then that stereotype may be break a bit. But still, it needs both social change and then individual assertiveness.
Rachel says thank you. And then the other question was on from Kat Furman. On slide 8, education was mentioned. Does that include education obtained in the U.S., in the country of origin, or a combination of both?
That's a good question. So immigration selectivity. A lot of the immigrants, they receive their college education in their homeland. That's how they can get here. And then some of them are getting advanced studies here, right? So, but there has been quite a lot of sociological study that is finding that foreign education has a disadvantage vis-a-vis US education. And that's why if you are looking at Asian American workforce, they tend to over-educate themselves to compensate for that structural disadvantage. So their level, the percentage of those who have a master or higher, it's twice as much as non-Hispanic white. So non-Hispanic white, of the college 4-year or over, their percentage may be high, but if you are looking breaking up to advanced education, they are quite low, a lot lower than Asian Americans, and that suggests that the foreign-born in particular, they are doing that, and then the U.S. one kind of follow their parents' path just to make sure that they do well, and without knowing that would reinforce the stereotype too. If you are trying to work twice as hard to be business good, and that that is kind of give ammunition to the neoconservatives, saying that look at them, they are doing fine, no problem with the system.
And then we're at 12:30. How long do we have the room for?
Probably 12:45.
Okay, cool. Just making sure.
Thank you so much for this talk. How useful do you think data disaggregation is to combat? That's been kind of a rallying cry in the field, right? We have to disaggregate data. We have to disaggregate data. How useful do you think that is in challenging, combating the model minority stereotype?
It's very important. So here talks about data desegregation. We like sociologists depend on the hot data. But a lot of times, if you try to look into Asian Americans, you have to lump them together without paying attention to the tremendous intergroup diversity. We have some Asian American subgroups that are in severe disadvantage, but that gets blurred by lumping the group together. But we don't have the desegregated data. So it's very important to have desegregated data. Talking about data, I had a very interesting conversation with a colleague in Singapore, because Singapore doesn't give race data, right? As if race is not a problem. It's like here too, some of the neoconservative segment of the Asian American population is strongly against desegregated data, saying that if you desegregate data, then it heightens my ethnicity for discrimination, especially in terms of college admission. They don't like that. They want to lump everybody together, as if you lump everybody together, the issue go away. Right? So it's very important to have data.
Yeah, so I've spent some time in my career studying interracial marriage, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where the data sits in the field in terms of, we know interracial marriage rates have gone up. We know that they're highest among Asian and white groups, more so than Black and white groups. So in thinking about answering the what do we do question, does the data show that children of Asian interracial relationships still carry that stereotype myth, or does that get filtered some through different family contexts, through I guess the question is interracial children of Asian parents, are they exceeding, maintaining, or are we seeing different patterns from some of them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, interracial marriage is a measure of assimilation, right? Especially when you're marrying white or the middle class. And as a matter of fact, because of the demographic composition of the marriage market, the minorities marrying white is just the trend, right? The kind of the dominant trend, because there are more whites to go around. In terms of the outcome, the socioeconomic outcome, the mixed race children is like if it's white and minority mixed race children, the outcome is very much so in a way there is some truth to that assimilation story that they're becoming American or they are becoming white when their average level of say education drop below their Asian parents. So they'll just become average, become American. One of the things talking about that structural assimilation are the Filipino Americans, right? The first generation, because of immigrant selectivity, their level of education is very high. The second generation, it drops significantly. So some people said that, oh, they experienced downward assimilation. I said, no, they have just become average American. They have just become American, right? Because their parents are highly selective immigrants. And in the Philippines, they are not average, they are not normal. Rather, they are the elite. So when they come here, like even if you are looking at the children of Filipino immigrants, still half of them have a college degree, and they are still a lot higher than the average American population. So that significant drop, like from 60% to 50%, 10% is quite significant. I don't think it's kind of a downward trend because they can't drop any further, I would argue. And mixed race children is the same way. Now, that is with minority, majority mix. The other mix, that it really depends. Like we also have a lot of Asian Black interracial marriage, Asian Latino interracial marriage. So that marriage, interestingly, they are more conforming, like control for social class, conforming to the Asian pattern, rather than conforming to the other minority pattern. Whereas if you are interracial marrying with white, you would drop below the Asian parent level to the white parent level or to the at minorities, there is a different kind of mix. And Zhou Chen at Brown, he did some very interesting analysis.
He was my advisor.
Yeah, they'll need the room.
Okay.